There's a specific kind of fear that has nothing to do with pain. It shows up after the pain, after the swelling goes down and the crutches disappear, and you're finally alone with a question no doctor, no coach, no scan can answer for you. Can I still do the thing that made me who I am? Most of us never have to answer that question in front of 80,000 people. September 22, 2024, Manchester, a Premier League title decider dressed up as an ordinary fixture, City and Arsenal, tangled at 2-2, the kind of scoreline nobody circles on a calendar, except for one moment. 21 minutes in, a 28-year-old midfielder goes down clutching his right knee, and he doesn't get back up the way he's supposed to. He doesn't know it yet, but the version of him that walked onto that pitch is gone, just like that. He'd put it plainer than any surgeon ever could, months later, admitting there were nights he wondered not just whether he'd play at his old level again, but whether he'd ever play again, period. 80,000 people go quiet for a penalty kick. They went a different kind of quiet for this one, the sound of a stadium doing math on someone else's career. Now, hold that image, because 22 months later, that same knee, rebuilt in an operating theater, doubted by strangers on the internet who'd never met him, managed like a ticking clock by his own manager, would carry him onto a stage in New Jersey to collect the single greatest individual honor his sport hands out. This is the story of Rodrigo Hernandez Castante. You know him as Rodri. And this isn't a story about the flashiest player in the world, or the highest scorer, or the most followed. It's a story about the most frightening question in professional sports. Am I still me? And the unglamorous, defensively minded midfielder who answered it louder than anyone saw coming. But if a torn ACL could rattle a player like this to his core, you have to understand something that happened 17 years earlier, a decision made in Madrid that Rodri wasn't even old enough to appeal. Because this wasn't the first time someone told him his body wasn't good enough, it was just the loudest. Rodrigo Hernandez Castante was born on June 22, 1996 in Madrid. Football wasn't a discovery in his house, it was the water he swam in. At 11 years old, he joined the Youth Academy of Atletico Madrid, one of the most storied development systems in Spanish football, the kind of place that has produced World Cup winners and discarded just as many along the way. Here's what made him different, even then. He wasn't the fastest kid on the pitch, and he was never going to be. What he had instead was somewhere between a gift and a habit, an ability to see a football match half a second before it happened. Teammates would sprint into space. Rodri would already know it was coming. That instinct would carry him a long way, but it wouldn't be enough, not yet, to keep him where he started. Years later, while most elite footballers were spending their downtime the way 20-somethings do, Rodri enrolled at Jaume I University in Castellón de la Plana and quietly worked toward a degree in business administration and management, attending lectures and sitting exams around a training schedule most people would find unsustainable on its own. He'd graduate in 2021, a European champion by then, still finishing what he started. It tells you something about how this story ends before we've even gotten to the beginning of it. This is a man who does not quit things halfway. But at 17, quitting wasn't his choice to make, because in 2013, Atletico Madrid decided he wasn't ready, and the reason they gave him would follow him for the next 13 years. The Academy's assessment was blunt. Rodri lacked the physical strength to compete at the level Atletico demanded. Not his reading of the game, not his passing, his body. At 17 years old, after 6 years inside one of the most respected academies in Europe, he was released. Sit with that for a second. Imagine spending a third of your life, your entire adolescence, inside one institution, believing it was preparing you for your future, and then being told, essentially, your legs won't get you there. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being cut at any age from anything. It doesn't feel like a redirection while it's happening. It feels like a verdict. You don't get to see the next 10 years from where you're standing. You only get to see the door closing. Rodri had two options in front of him, and only one of them let him keep playing football at a serious level. He took it. He signed with Villarreal, a smaller club, a lower profile, a step down in almost every way that gets measured in headlines. Nobody was writing think pieces about a released Atletico teenager joining Villarreal's youth ranks in 2013. There was no montage. There was just a decision, made quietly, to keep going anyway. If you've ever been told by a boss, a school, a relationship, your own body that you don't have what it takes, you already know what that year felt like. Not traumatic, not cinematic, just heavy,
every single day in a way that's hard to explain to people who weren't there. They doubted his legs, not his mind. Keep that distinction in your head. It's going to matter enormously on a night a long way from here, in front of a global audience that has forgotten this story ever happened. Because here's what nobody could see in 2013. The thing that gets you cut as a teenager could be the exact thing that makes you the best player on earth as an adult, if it's the right thing, and if somebody's still willing to bet on it. Somebody was.
Villarreal didn't get Rodri because they out-scouted Atletico. They got him because they were paying attention to something Atletico had stopped valuing, not what his legs could do, but what his brain already did. On February 7, 2015, still a teenager, Rodri made his senior debut for Villarreal's reserve side, coming off the bench in a league match. 10 months later, on December 17, 2015, he made his first team debut for Villarreal proper, a Copa del Rey tie against SD Huesca. He wasn't spectacular. He was something more useful than spectacular. He was correct, over and over again, in a sport where being correct is far rarer than being flashy. Inside the club, a description started following him around, the same handful of words repeated by different coaches in different seasons, the kind of consensus that only forms around something real. He doesn't run the game, he reads it. 2 years earlier, a club had released him for what his body couldn't do. Now a different club was building a midfield around what his mind already could. That's the symbol to hold on to. Not a trophy, not a number on a stat sheet yet, just a sentence. He reads it. Remember that phrase. It's going to come back in the most literal, most statistically undeniable way imaginable, in a stadium in New Jersey more than a decade from now. What followed was not a slow climb. It was a sprint dressed up as patience. In May 2018, Atletico Madrid, the same club that had released him 5 years earlier, paid roughly 20 million euros to bring him home. Full circle, except nobody uses that phrase yet. Save it, this story isn't done using it. Rodri made his second debut for the club on August 15, 2018, in the UEFA Super Cup, playing 71 minutes as Atletico beat city rivals Real Madrid 4-2 after extra time. The kid who wasn't strong enough was starting European finals for the club that once cut him. 1 season, that's all it took for the next call to come, this time from Manchester. On July 3, 2019, Manchester City triggered the £62.6 million release clause in his contract, a club record fee at the time, more than City had ever paid for a player before him, more than they'd paid for Riyad Mahrez 12 months earlier. Rodri was 23 years old, and he'd just become the most expensive gamble in the club's history on a player most casual fans outside Spain had never heard of. Pep Guardiola had. What came next reads like a highlight reel, with the sound turned down, because Rodri's brilliance rarely made noise. 4 consecutive Premier League titles, 2021-2022 through 2023-24, and then, on June 10, 2023, in the Ataturk Olympic Stadium in Istanbul, the night Manchester City finally won the Champions League and completed the treble, Rodri scored the only goal of the game. 68th minute, a cutback deflected into his path off Manuel Akanji's pass to Bernardo Silva, and Rodri measured a finish that bent past 2 defenders and into the corner. 1 goal, 1 trophy that had eluded the club for its entire history. He was named Man of the Match in a Champions League final. The kid whose legs weren't good enough had just scored the winner in the biggest club match on the planet. A year later, in July 2024, he did it again on an even bigger stage, helping Spain beat England 2-1 in the final of Euro 2024 in Berlin, overcoming Germany and France along the way. 4 former World Cup winners dispatched on the road to the trophy. Rodri was named player of the tournament. Spain's own coach called him, in words that would age with brutal irony, a perfect computer. But here's the detail almost nobody remembers, because it got buried under the celebration. In that same final, Rodri was substituted at halftime with a knee injury. 10 weeks later, that same knee would end his season completely, and 3 weeks after that, while he was still on crutches, still weeks from even attempting to walk without them, the sport's biggest individual prize would be placed in his hands anyway. He'd win the Ballon d'Or ahead of Vinicius Jr. as arguably the best footballer alive on paper, unable to prove it on a football pitch.
Try to imagine holding the greatest individual trophy in your profession while genuinely unsure if you'll ever compete in that profession again. That's not irony, that's just what fear looks like when it's dressed up in a tuxedo. Here's what's easy to forget about this story so far. None of this happens if one club, at Rodri's lowest, hadn't looked at a released 17-year-old and decided to believe in something nobody could measure yet. Villarreal didn't have proof he'd become anything. They just had a hunch, and they acted on it before the world gave them any reason to. That's the same bet I'm making on you right now. If you've stayed this long, some part of you already believes this story is going somewhere worth arriving at. You just haven't seen the proof yet. Subscribe before we get to the part that earns it. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to a channel built on stories like this one.
Let's go back to September 22nd, 2024 and slow it down. Rodri's first Premier League start of the season, 21 minutes in, a coming together with Arsenal's Thomas Partey, and he's down, clutching his knee, waving for the physio before he's even fully stopped moving. He's helped off. Tests follow. The word ACL starts circulating before he's even out of his kit. Pep Guardiola confirmed it days later in a press conference that carried the weight of a man watching his entire season change shape in real time. Surgery would include both his ACL and his meniscus. His verdict was short, almost clinical, the kind of sentence you say when you already know how much it's going to hurt to say it out loud. This season is over for Rodri. The surgery itself didn't happen immediately. Swelling and the need for a full range of motion to return first pushed the operation back for weeks. It was finally completed in Madrid in early December, roughly 10 weeks after the injury itself. 10 weeks of a professional athlete's body simply waiting, doing nothing, while the clock most athletes fear more than any opponent kept running. One injury expert, assessing the tear publicly at the time, didn't sugarcoat the timeline. Over 270 days typically for a return to play alone, and a real chance, he warned, that a player coming back from an injury this severe might never again be the same player. Not hurt, not slower, just different, diminished, a ghost of the version that walked off that pitch. Gone, some feared, for good. Rodri didn't disappear into that fear quietly. He said it out loud, later, in his own words, that when he came back there were doubts about playing normally again. Real limitations, real pain, and a specific stretch of nights where the question wasn't, will I be as good as I was, but the far darker one underneath it, will I play again at all? And just when the story seemed to be bending toward recovery, he did return. 8 months later, 7 minutes off the bench against Bournemouth in May 2025, then a bigger role in City's dramatic run to keep their title hopes alive. The knee betrayed him again. At the Club World Cup in June 2025, in a last 16 match against Al Hilal, he suffered a fresh setback and had to be substituted. He wouldn't be right again until September. His own manager, who had guided him through every step of this, said it plainly to the press. This wasn't about 6 months or 7 or 8. It would take well over a year, more than a year, on what Guardiola called, without exaggeration, the massage table, before anyone would see the real Rodri again. The cruelest part of professional sport isn't that your body can fail you. It's that it doesn't read the calendar. It just sends the bill whenever it wants, and the invoice doesn't care that you already paid once. By the start of the 2025-26 season, Rodri still wasn't fully trusted with a starting shirt. Transfer speculation swirled, his name linked with a move away from Manchester City entirely. He was managed carefully, cautiously, like a player his own manager wasn't sure he could fully rely on anymore. Somewhere in Spain, a World Cup squad was being assembled for the following summer. Nobody was certain his name would be on that list, least of all, maybe, Rodri himself. Spain opened their World Cup campaign with something almost anticlimactic, a draw against tournament debutants Cape Verde. It wasn't the statement a two-time reigning European champion is supposed to make, but it also wasn't a collapse. It was a team and a captain finding their feeting again after everything. What followed was one of the most dominant World Cup campaigns in the tournament's history. Match after match, Spain controlled possession, controlled tempo, controlled the story. And at the center of nearly every one of those matches was the player nobody was sure would even be fit enough to start. Rodri wore the captain's armband. Across the tournament, Spain conceded a single goal.
1 in 8 matches against the best attacking talent on the planet. They let in 1 football.
On July 19, 2026, at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, Spain met Argentina in the final. It was goalless, tense, suffocating. Deep into the second half of extra time, Argentina down to 10 men after a red card. Lionel Messi, 39 years old and playing what may have been the last match of his international career, unable to find a single clean sight of goal. In the 106th minute, substitute Ferran Torres finally broke the deadlock. Spain, 1-0. World champions for the second time in their history. Rodri completed 101 of 105 passes in that final alone. He won 4 out of every 5 duels he contested. Across the whole tournament, he completed roughly 650 passes, the most any player has ever completed across a single World Cup, at a 93% success rate, including around 170 completed in the attacking third, breaking a record that had stood since Javi Hernandez set it at South Africa 2010. He didn't score a single goal at this World Cup. He didn't register a single assist. And when the individual awards were handed out, ahead of Lionel Messi's silver ball and Kylian Mbappe's bronze, it was Rodri who received the tournament's greatest individual honor, the Golden Ball, for the best player at the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Say that back to yourself. A defensive midfielder, 0 goals, 0 assists, voted the single best player at the biggest sporting event on the planet. Remember what they told a 17-year-old in 2013, that his legs weren't strong enough? Remember what Villarreal's coaches started saying instead, years later? He doesn't run the game, he reads it? 13 years, 1 torn ACL, 2 setbacks, and 18 months of genuine doubt later, that's exactly how he won the biggest prize in football. Not with the fastest legs on the pitch, with the sharpest mind on it. Measured, recorded, and made official in a stat sheet that nobody can argue with. The thing they said would hold him back is the exact thing that carried him to the top of the world. Circle closed. As I'm telling you this in August 2026, Rodri is 30 years old, a World Cup champion, a Golden Ball winner, and, by his own admission, a man who spent a stretch of 2024 genuinely unsure he'd ever play football again. Turns out the scariest statistic in this entire story was never on a stat sheet. It was the number of nights he lay awake, certain this exact moment would never come. He was wrong, and thank God he kept training anyway. Here's the thing about fear that almost nobody says out loud. It doesn't lie to you about the danger. It's usually right that something could go wrong. What it lies to you about is the ending. Rodri's fear in that hospital bed in 2024 wasn't irrational. Torn ACLs do end careers. 18 months of recovery does sometimes fail to bring a player all the way back. The injury expert who warned he might never be the same wasn't being cruel. He was being honest, based on everything the data usually says. Fear had every right to be in that room. It just didn't get the final word. You don't need to be a professional athlete to know this feeling. Maybe it wasn't a knee, maybe it was a diagnosis, a layoff, a failed exam, a relationship that ended and left you wondering if you still knew how to be loved by anyone. Maybe somebody at some point told you, directly or between the lines, that you didn't have what it takes. And maybe, for a while, you believed them, because the evidence in that specific moment seemed to agree. The lesson in Rodri's story isn't don't be afraid. That's not realistic, and it's not even honest. He was afraid, by his own account, more afraid than most of us will ever have to admit to a stranger with a microphone. The lesson is smaller than that and harder. You're allowed to be terrified and still show up for the recovery, still do the boring rehab, still take the smaller club's offer at 17 because it's the only door still open. The outcome was never guaranteed. It rarely is. He didn't know in 2024 how this ends. Neither do you right now about whatever version of this you're living through. Fear never actually left Rodri's story. It just got outvoted 90 minutes at a time for 22 months until the final scoreline read a lot better than the fear ever predicted it would. So go back to the question we opened with. Am I still me? Rodri didn't get an answer to that in a hospital bed, or in a press conference, or even in the quiet, private moment he admitted his own doubt out loud. He got the answer the only way anyone ever really does, by finding out one uncertain day at a time whether he was willing to keep showing up before he knew. You already know the answer to your own version of that question too. You just haven't finished finding it out yet.
Thank you for watching this one all the way through. Stories like Rodri's only work because someone was willing to sit with the whole thing, not just the highlight reel at the end. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me, were you more nervous during the injury, more moved by the recovery, or more shocked by the golden ball snub that wasn't? I read every single one. And if you want to see what it looks like when fear shows up for the other side of a career, not the beginning of a comeback, but the ending of an era, stay close. Lionel Messi walked off that same World Cup final pitch in New Jersey at 39 years old, having just started his third World Cup final, with no goals, no assists, and very possibly no more chances left to wear that armband again. Next time, we're telling that story. Lionel Messi, the last dance that broke football's greatest. Some comebacks end in a trophy. Some legacies end in a walk off the pitch, in silence, with the whole world watching. I'll see you there.